This is an important film, a film that brings darkness to light. The Sound of Freedom is directed by Alejandro Monteverde and stars Jim Caviezel as Tim Ballard. So, The Sound of Freedom is one of those movies that kind of came out of nowhere. No one was really talking about it, and then it released, and there was a tidal wave of buzz surrounding it. This is an Angel Studios production, and it's been circulating around that this particular picture was shelved. And Angel Studios went around and tried to sell it to a few different studios, and just about everyone passed. So they decided to put it out themselves. There's kind of been this whole uproar about the studio system not allowing this film to see the light of day. And it's so fascinating because this is a film all about uncovering the darkness of childhood trafficking. This movie has a very serious subject matter, and I felt like it handled it very delicately. It doesn't shy away from the realities of the situation, but it doesn't overindulge in it. I feel like sometimes these faith-based films, and I categorize this as a faith-based film because it's produced by Angel Studios, I tend to sometimes think that those specific films shy away from the harsh realities of things. There is a lot of darkness in this world. Childhood trafficking is not something to be taken lightly, and this film doesn't do that. Instead of showing us explicit images, it sits outside a window on closed blinds. Everybody in the audience knows exactly what is happening in that situation, and it doesn't need to show us that. I think if it had showed us that, it would have really turned a lot of the audience off, and it would have made it as an accessible movie to as many people. And I think that's what this movie is trying to do. It's trying to get this message and this story out to as many people as possible because it's such a rampant issue that doesn't get a lot of publicity. And while this subject matter is handled very delicately, I have to say, the film is really a tale of two cities. There are some really strong filmmaking techniques and storytelling beats within this film. And then there's a totally different film that's highly melodramatic, that's amateurish at times. And it's a weird dichotomy that seems to kind of go back and forth, specifically in the first half of this movie. And let me say, while I recognize them, while it took me out of the film to an extent, it still doesn't take away from the overall message of the movie and from the second half of this film, which I think is a really strong film. This movie was made just shy of $15 million, and I have to say, with a $15 million budget, they really knock it out of the park. This has a high level of production value. There are an immense amount of set pieces and locations going on, and you can tell that they used their budget wisely. Leaving this film, if I didn't know what the budget was, I would have assumed that this was a $30 to $50 million film. And the fact that they were able to pull this type of film off with half the budget is actually a really impressive feat. Now, I've got to say, the first half of this film has some really strong pieces to it. I think the opening sequence is really profound. But at the same time, specifically some of the interactions that Tim has with his family, specifically his wife and his boss, just don't work. They're incredibly melodramatic. The dialogue is off-putting. There's a lack of nuance. It's really on the nose. And I think if they had been a little more subtle in their approach, that it would have really elevated the film. But once Tim gets to Colombia and starts this rescue operation, I feel like the movie really picks up, and a lot of the melodramatic issues that I had in the first half of this film go away. It becomes a really strong piece about this underground operation trying to detain these childhood traffickers and rescue the children, specifically a little girl. Performance-wise, Jim Caviezel is respectable. He gives a very solid performance. He delivers his lines well, while others around him tend to not be able to deliver the dialogue as well. And even some of the lines that you would think would come off corny or cringy actually work because you believe him as a character. There's a specific line that's in the trailer of this movie where he says, "God's children aren't for sale." And you really believe in the sentiment and the statement that he's saying. You know, that line is very powerful, but in ways it could come off in a film kind of corny or melodramatic. but in that moment and within the context of the scene, it works really well. But there are other times in this film where dialogue is spoken that just doesn't work, and performances are given that really drag down the scene. Specifically, I have to talk about Tim Ballard's wife in this movie, who's a very small character, almost unnecessary, and another small character in this movie, Tim's boss. Every time those two characters showed up on screen, it really dragged the film down. And part of it was because of the lack of restraint from the director to just sit in the action of the scene and not rely on the dialogue. And then sometimes it was really the performances. I will say Bill Camp as Vampiro is phenomenal. He is by far the best part of this movie. The moment that his character shows up, it just elevates the film to another level. He has a level of nuance to him, and his character is so compelling. He gives a monologue that has no right to be in this film. It was on such another level compared to the rest of the dialogue in this film. I really have to commend Bill Camp. He is the highlight of this film, the strongest performance, and I think most people who go and see this film will agree with me. One more performance I want to talk about is Crystal Aparicio. She is the young girl that Tim is trying to rescue throughout the film. And I have to say, she isn't given a lot of screen time, but every time she is on screen, it's so impactful and she is so believable. You can really feel the pain and fear behind her eyes. You feel for her. You understand where she's been and what she's gone through. And it's all because of her performance and the nuanced take that she's able to create. And she is such a young actress. She has such a bright future and career ahead of her. I could really see this role in this film catapulting her career to higher levels. So yeah, The Sound of Freedom has some really strong moments and then some moments that don't hit the mark. But for $14.5 million as its budget, it really resonates and it's a strong film. So guys, that's gonna do it for me. If you like these movie reviews, make sure to subscribe to Dude Reacts and The Fellow Dude on YouTube. Until next time guys, see you then.